Good evening and welcome to episode 40 of the Mouthwash Talk Show, a minty fresh take on politics. And wow, we just did a little bit of an audible because we were supposed to be talking about something different tonight about property rights or something. But since they've come out with this vaccine mandate on children and made it, I don't know if it's a mandate yet, but they've made it available to kids, we thought, well, we need to do a conversation about this. And I know Lucy Brenton is super fired up about this because she's got quite a bit of information on this. And then, of course, we have small talk. And then later on the show, we're going to have Dr. Stock come on. I apologize for not getting these guys earlier than that, but I contacted Dr. Galvin and Dr. Stock today after lunch. And Dr. Stock is actually going to 2 or 3 events tonight, and then he's going to pop on here after he gets done with his 9 o'clock event. So we have plenty to talk about. But first, I want to clear up a couple of things from last week. We did the education show, and I got some people in my neighborhood a little fired up about this because if you'll recall, I used the Sanders School as my example of failure in the school system, and they basically at the Sanders School, they had 0 people pass any of the iLearn or iStep. Well, I got a couple of messages from one person on the school board and another concerned citizen that was straightening me out because they told me that Sanders School is for special needs kids and that they don't really count in the process. I'm like, well, I don't know that. I mean, I know that I go by the data. And they were a little upset about it. So with that being said, we're going to have actually a meeting here at the Mars Hill Arts Center next Monday at 7 p.m. And we got some officials, some elected officials coming in, and we're going to talk about the education system. So we are going to see what happens next Monday on that. So if you're in Wayne Township and care about education, then come on out to see us at the Mars Hill Arts Center at 7 p.m. Next Monday. And then another point that I'd like to make is while I was doing the show last week, somebody, a local thief was rifling through my cars just right out there in the driveway. So a lot of exciting things going on here at Mars Hill. But hey, the business at hand tonight is going to be the vaccine and children. And I know that this is sort of a hot topic as the vaccine mandates roll out and the mask mandates roll out and all those things. So pretty much we're going to bring the panel on here and we're going to get talking about this. And I'm going to have a couple questions for them to answer. So let's bring on our guests. I'm going to bring on Ed Liptrap from South Bend here. Let's put Ed on the spotlight first. And Ed, how are you doing this evening?
I'm doing great, John. How are you doing?
Oh yeah, I just living the dream here. Everything's clicking on all cylinders.
Absolutely.
So you ready for the discussion? You may be on the side of you may be one man in a lonely fight tonight, but I know you're up for it.
I feel like I'm on a life raft in the middle of the ocean tonight. So yes, I am ready.
You're a red life raft, a blue life raft, and a red sea. I got you. Got you. So, well, I'm going to bring on Lucy because I think she's going to be your number one friend tonight. So, Lucy, how are you this evening? And what is behind you there? What's all that?
Well, I've actually got the openvares.com website behind me. I'm going to mess with the lighting a little bit and get a little bit more washed out. But if I move here, you'll see that the reports of vaccine adverse events in the vaccine adverse reporting system shows 18,000. There it is. 78 COVID vaccine reported deaths. So there are nearing 20,000 deaths, over 18,000 deaths associated with the COVID vaccine. And yet it's not being investigated and it's not being revealed to people. So we have a real problem with informed consent. And that's what I'm here to talk about tonight is informed consent. And the question of the day is, who owns you?
Oh yeah, I knew you'd be chopping at this one as soon as this came out. The little chatter on our Facebook Messenger got going about doing an audible and talking about this. So yeah, that is something that's going to be a fun discussion tonight. So let's bring on Tiffany. And Tiffany, how are you this evening? You're not the host this week, but I'm I'm worried that you're going to take over for me, but not really.
No, not at all. Not at all. Hey, John, I want to commend you for bringing together your community to talk about the Sanders School. You've always when you asked me to be on the show, you said it was a minty fresh spin on politics and a place where people can talk about their views civilly. And I want to applaud you for living that. So congratulations for that. I'm sure it'll be a great discussion.
Well, my saying is do something. So, I'm pretty good at complaining, but it's whining if you don't do something about it. So, well, it's good to see you on the show tonight. So I'm going to come back on here real quick, and you can see my background, same as it was. That's actually, I think it's a real picture of COVID, but I like it because of the colors. I mean, I don't know if COVID's that color or not, but it does seem like it is the topic of a lot of discussions tonight. So I'm going to ask you a question right out of the gate, and I'm going to see what you say about this. And I'm going to talk about the mandates in schools and where we're headed with that. If kids are going to be able to go to school without a mask, and it looks like some of the schools might be lifting the mask mandates, but they're talking about this vaccine mandate. My question is, how can we let kids drop out of school before they graduate, but yet we can make them have a mask or a shot? So I'm going to go ahead and start with Ed, and we'll bring you on here. And Ed, you can answer that question for me, and then I'll let the two sharks get you. I'm just going to feed you to the sharks after this.
Thanks. I didn't know we were going to get going like right out the gate, like punch.
Oh yeah,
yeah,
you want to
it's
warm up?
coming.
You want me to ask Tiffany first or something?
No, I'm good. To be honest with you, the big thing for me is the conversation, and I do have concerns. I know that, as far as the masks go, we have had them in our schools here in South Bend. I know that I have actually gone to places. I've gone on, my kids' field trip. I've actually been in the classroom working with the kids. I was actually proud of how well they've done, amazingly well with the masks. As far as the vaccine, the conversation on the mandated vaccines, I know we're not there yet, and I would be interested at the state level, what we're talking about there. And so, yeah, it's hard for me to kind of comment on that without knowing where we're going or hearing what's in the pipeline.
Yeah, and I know that's a little bit different, but boy, it sure seems like they put the narrative out there and then fill it in. I just, I don't know. I think the verdict's still out, and I'll be interested to see what Dr. Stock has to say later on about this, because I just asked him to be on the show, and he's going to come on. So put that up on the ticker. So Tiffany, I'm gonna save the big shark for later on this question. But so Tiffany, what do you think about, you can drop out of school, but yet you have to wear a mask? Well, let's just keep it at that, because the shot mandate's not here yet. So let's just talk about, you have to wear a mask at school, but yet you could drop out.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I don't have a child in the school system. My daughter's down at IU. And I know last year they had some significant issues with COVID. And then this year, it's surprising. She lives in a house with 94 girls. They do wear masks to classes, but, not in the house. They're doing a really great job with a lot of herd immunity in the house. I know there are probably some of the girls who've been vaccinated. I know some of the girls are not. So I just think that you have to give people the opportunity to understand the risks and to proceed accordingly. My daughter's, she's 20 years old. I can't make her get vaccinated, or I can't tell her to not get vaccinated. It is purely her choice. One of my coworkers, I met his little girl. She's a kindergartner, first grade. And I asked her how she felt about wearing a mask. And it was really funny. She said, she likes it. She has a very sensitive nose and she can smell all kinds of things, and it's very distracting for her. So wearing a mask for her is not a big deal. I also have a high school intern who works with me, and his idea is, I'll wear it when I need to. And if I don't need to wear it, I won't wear it. So I just think that there has to be a lot of choice, and people need to find their liberties and, accept certain risks. And, I was at the theater, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 weeks ago, and it was time to leave. And I was like, wow, this is a crowd. I'm going to put on a mask, and then at one point toward the end of the show, all the parents behind me were yelling for their kids. And I was like, wow, they're spewing droplets on me. I'm going to put on my mask. So, you just have to be willing to accept what's going on and just be very informed. and understand your risks. And also, and I think Dr. Stock does a really great job of talking about how you can improve your own immune system and take care of yourself. So I think that's part of it too, understanding the risks and understanding what you can do to improve your own immunity. And I'll talk later about something I found in the Wall Street Journal that I thought was really interesting.
All right, that was just that. You are such a good host. You got a perfect segue to Lucy there on, liberty and rights and all that. So Lucy, here you go. I know you've been waiting for this, so let's hear what you got to say.
I have been, and people that have followed me for a while know that I'm not going to hold back on this particular issue. It's too important to talk about personal autonomy, bodily autonomy, liberty, to get down to the very essence of who owns you. Are we mere cattle that are owned by the government? Or are we just simply human resources that are born into a system and therefore become a resource of the system, so that, in the case of China, your organs can be harvested, or here you become a pump, a well rather, for profits from the pharmaceutical companies. So I'm going to put down a really hard line tonight. And that hard line is, I don't believe that it is appropriate, and I'm going to speak for my own family, for there to be any vaccination at all. My 10 children have never been vaccinated. My 3 grandchildren have never been vaccinated. And I don't believe there is an appropriate vaccine. I don't believe there's a safe vaccine. I don't believe there is an effective vaccine. That's a very hard line to take. A lot of people want to pussyfoot around the issue and say, well, I'm not anti-vax, but no, I will absolutely come down on an absolute stance of anti-all vaccines. I'll be able to back that up with a lot of data. You'll see behind me the Open VAERS website. VAERS is the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, for which the U.S. government is responsible to receive reports of adverse vaccine events. You would think that they would then investigate those events, but that unfortunately doesn't happen. And so right now we're looking at over 18,000 COVID-related vaccine deaths, and we're now unleashing that vaccine on unsuspecting parents and convincing them to put their child at risk of death. I mean, there is no two ways about this. So for those who would like to see some of the resources that I'm going to cite tonight, I would invite you to go to my website, lucyforliberty.com. Go to the drop down. You'll see vaccine info. So the drop down is, let's see, I'm going to switch there. It's medical freedom, and then drop down to vaccine info. And then you'll be able to see exactly what I'm citing. We'll talk about the Indiana law tonight. We can talk about constitutional law. And then we're going to talk about company profits and where this is really coming from. So I'm excited. I've been waiting for this show.
Yeah, you are our pseudo guest tonight. And producer Adam, if you could put that link in our comments, that would be great to do that, so that people can go there and follow Lucy and see what she has to say. Because I'll tell you what, she reads a lot of books and she chases this stuff down, and she's got 10 kids to prove it. So you know what? I call that validation and credibility right there. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to play the Mark Small talk now. And this is going to be fun because, I've had so much time to put this show together. I think I started at 2 p.m. tonight. So I didn't even have a chance to listen to this. So this is going to be new for everyone. So let's go to Small Talk and see what Mark Small has to say this week.
Hi, Mark Small. This is Small Talk. There was an old saying when I was a kid, never trust a skinny cook. You always want to look at a situation and see what people close to it believe. When you're talking about vaccinations, when I was a kid, we were scared to death of polio. You'd see on TV all the time video of kids, or film of kids in iron lungs, and it was always such a really ominous thing. And yet polio had a vaccine developed. Jonas Salk did that. He refused to accept any money for profit on it. But when the vaccine was developed, there were no other vaccines for polio out there. Nothing had been developed. There was nothing to build on. And they have that with COVID, because the SARS virus, for one thing, was one thing that they developed stuff for. And so you could build on that. That's one reason why the COVID vaccines were developed as quickly as they were. Now, secondly, we have a problem with facts in this world. Near the end of World War II, as Allied forces were overrunning death camps run by the Nazis, Eisenhower made sure that villagers who lived close to the camps walked through the death camps so that no one would be able to deny that the Holocaust occurred. I'm Nazifying the conversation, right? No, I'm not. The Republican Party already did that in Texas. They say, well, Is there a Holocaust? I'm for. I'm against. Present both sides something in their educational curricula down there, such as they are. But the last thing is this, never trust a skinny cook. When people are telling you don't get vaccinated or that your kids shouldn't get vaccinated, and they're talking from the studios of Fox or Newsmax, or they're a member of the family that just occupied the White House for the previous 4 years, 4 years prior to January 20th this year, wonder something about them, like they've gotten vaccinated. What about their kids? I don't think they really have consciences. Those people who were occupying the White House and stuff, I don't think that they really care about your kids. I think they care about their own. They care about anybody. So the question to ask after you ask, did they get vaccinated? So you can ask yourself whether you should, is did they have their kids vaccinated? And if they did, I certainly would think, unless you're completely bereft of any sense, you'd want to make sure your kids got vaccinated. I've gotten both mine and my booster shot, and I think it's important that everybody do that because it's the only way we can beat this pandemic. I'm Mark Small of Small Talk. Peace, love, happiness, freedom, all that. See you next week.
Well, that'll give us a lot of stuff to talk about. So I'm going to have a quick question for you. Actually, it's going to be a little personal story about polio because my aunt had polio and she had it in 1942. She was born in 40. So she had it when she was 2 years old and she had a pretty extreme case of it. And back then, you know what they did? They gave you shock treatment, and a frontal lobotomy was the first way of treating experimental. It was experimental, but that was the sign of the times. That was a zeitgeist. That's one of those fancy German words that means it's just like what we did in the times. The polio vaccine didn't actually come out till about 1956. My father-in-law had a milder case of polio, and he has an arm that was a little bit, he not full function, but he was a golf coach, plays golf. It really was not that burdensome to him. So my question is to the panel is, this is a very early on, and some people would say experimental. And I think at this point, we're halfway through the trial here as far as a short-term trial on how it's going to work. So I'm going to go in the middle here. I'm going to go with Tiffany, and I'm going to ask you if you have any concerns about the long-term effects of the virus or of the vaccine, and what's your opinion on that?
The long-term effects of the vaccine, I think it's something that we're definitely not talking about. I know Dorn doesn't like this, but I worked in pharma for a number of years, and I had the opportunity to launch medicines. Also, I had the opportunity to go in and talk to doctors months later or a year later and tell them that we were wrong. This medicine does have harmful side effects. These are some of the potential issues. Always letting folks know about the adverse events. But one of the things that would always happen is when you have a medication, your package insert is always getting updated when new studies come through and when you get new long-term safety data. And that's just something that, that happens when you know more, you do better. And you're able to instruct people to do better. We have lots of medicines where when they first came out, 10, 20 years later, you would never use those medicines. And I'm not saying that's necessarily the case with any of these vaccines. I'm just saying that we learn more when we get more safety data. The medicines that I had the chance to promote, they would go through years of safety data before they were given to human subjects in large numbers. So that's just some of my concerns is like long-term safety data. But I do think one of the things that we don't talk about is that natural immunity, what happens to the body after somebody does, get COVID and survive. And as we talk about possible mandates and vaccinating children, there's just data out there that shows that, their cases are less severe. There's less death among children. And in that group, natural immunity is good for that group of kids. Also spacing out the doses to get better immunity, smaller doses. So it's one of those things where we're kind of learning as we go. We're building the bridge as we cross the river. So, hats off to people who are running out to get their kids vaccinated. I think that's great, especially if there's other reasons in the home to do that. But I think also hats off to parents who are being a little skeptical and a little resistant to running out and doing it right now. It's kind of like people who go out and buy those, who bought the PT Cruiser when it first came out. Some people thought they were super cool, and some people thought they were absolutely ridiculous. But when I think about like new vaccines in kids, excuse me, I'm reminded of the HPV vaccine that they launched, I don't know, 5 or 10 years ago. And, I was the one who decided if my daughter was going to be vaccinated or not. And initially, I was for it. And then I saw some information and some data, and then I wasn't. And then when I learned more about the type of cancers that it prevents, it got my attention. And one of the things people don't talk about with the HPV vaccine is that a lot of the oral, throat, and esophageal cancers that you see in men and women, and some anal cancers, they're HPV cancers. So that was one of the things that we didn't really talk about when we were rolling out that HPV vaccine for girls between the ages of like 7 and 12. We didn't talk about the reason why. We didn't talk about it preventing mouth, oral, and esophageal cancers in men and women later in life. So I just think that, informed consent is very important. And it's also important for people to make their own choices.
Yeah, and I agree that we just came out with some updated study on that virus, on that vaccine, and it's proved to be positive. But that's 10 years. That's taken 10 years. So let's see, Lucy, where are you at on this? And
I'm just taking some little happy notes. So I wanted to address what Mark Small said first, because people think that the polio vaccine cleared polio, and that's absolutely not true. The disease incidence decreased before vaccines were introduced. In fact, disease decreasing, the incidence of disease decreasing correlated with plumbing and people not drinking the same water that their sewage was in, because polio is transmitted by fecal matter, which is why so many people that get polio nowadays actually get it from changing their baby's diaper, and then maybe they didn't wash their hands adequately and they rub their eye and it enters the body. So what I also want to say is that President Roosevelt is often lifted up as see what happened to FDR, and he was paralyzed because of polio. No, I've got an alternate idea for that, and that is there was this thing called Paris green, and it was actually an insecticide based on arsenic. And the symptoms of polio actually very closely parallel arsenic poisoning. So the mythology is that FDR was out swimming in his family's lake one day, and the next day he's struck down with polio and he can't walk anymore. Well, I would offer to you that what actually happened is, like many of the people getting polio at that time, it was summertime, his family was wealthier, they had access to their own orchards and to fresh fruit. Those orchards were sprayed with Paris green. The Paris green was then taken from the trees with the rain, and the runoff went directly into the lake. And so he actually suffered massive poisoning from Paris green and arsenic. Now, what commonly happens when you have a vaccine come out is that afterwards, it's actually very common. I can take you to Illinois. Illinois had a meeting with their doctors in the 60s, and they actually changed the name and the classification of disease in order to cause polio incidence to decrease. They simply changed it to acute flaccid myelitis, and it was actually polio. So they were able to take polio from hundreds of cases to 7 cases simply by renaming and reclassifying the diseases. So Mark also talked about the iron lung and how, oh my God, do you want kids in iron lungs? Well, you don't have iron lungs anymore for the same reason you don't drive a 57 Chevy, because now we have ventilators. There is this technological, march that we've had. But I think the most damning thing that has happened throughout the entire question of vaccinations is back in 1986, when Ronald Reagan signed the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act, and he removed all product liability from the manufacturers. Prior to that, if your child was harmed, you could sue the vaccine manufacturer directly. Many did, especially for the whole cell DPT vaccine. They got multi-million-dollar judgments against the vaccine manufacturers because their products were faulty. They were negligently faulty. They were causing children disability and death. But around about 1986, the vaccine manufacturers came to Congress and they basically said our products cause so much harm that people get multi-million-dollar judgments. We can't make any money. And it's the Cold War, remember? So we still have the wall up. We still have, Russia's, kids are hiding underneath their desks because Russia's going to nuke us, or they're going to put diphtheria in the water supply. And so it was seen as such a public health issue that to indemnify the manufacturers. So once the manufacturers had that that disconnect between the safety and the lawsuit feedback loop, then the number of vaccines children took exploded. So I was born in 1971. I had 4 or 5 vaccines. Obviously not my choice. I was too young and my parents poisoned me. I even got the smallpox vaccine. That was the last year in 71, I think, to get that. So sadly, that happened to me. I did not let that happen to my children. But the number of vaccines now, if you look at the schedule, that a tiny, tiny baby gets, on the first day of life, a baby gets a hepatitis B vaccine. That's a sexually transmitted disease for IV drug users and the sexually promiscuous. I assured the doctor with the birth of our first child that I had in the hospital that my child was not using IV drugs and she was not having sex. So there was no reason for us to have that hepatitis B vaccine. And I certainly didn't have hepatitis B, so she was not at risk. So obviously I could go on and on and on. I'm going to shut up now, but I think the biggest tragedy was the removal of the liability off of the manufacturers, because now you get 72 doses of vaccines before age 5. And sometimes kids get more vaccines at a visit when they're 7 or 8 or 12 pounds than I did in my entire life. That's a real tragedy. What have you got to say, Ed?
Yeah, go
Over to
Ed,
you,
go.
Ed.
Just take a break, Mark.
Yeah, let's everybody go to the commercial. If you had a commercial,
Yeah.
Over to you, Ed.
So the truth of the matter is, I think my biggest problem with the entire conversation is that multiple things can be true at the same time. And so part of me, there is a long history. Like our medical community, anybody throwing up their arms right now and saying, like, why don't you trust the medical community? I think that there is a long history of it. I'll go back to the fact, I mean, what was it, 2014, the American Medical Association comes out and apologizes because of all the stuff that they've done against minorities and the Black community. And there is a long history and a long trail there. And so, especially working in minority communities, I hear a lot that people are skeptical about it. People do not want the vaccine, that they don't. And, it's hard for me. I've been to other countries, been outside of the United States, and also seen the flip side of that, where some of these countries, third world countries, are facing stuff that you'd never even think of here. And so, like I said, I do believe there's two things can be true at the same time. I think that they can have an impact, that the vaccines have had an impact, but I think also the medical community is waking up to the realization that you have caused a lot of harm over time, that these big drug companies, big for-profit drug companies in this country, absolutely deserve it. And you can't, for me, it's hard to say that I'm opposed to these big for-profit drug companies doing some of the stuff that they have done. Our whole entire opioid crisis, that's not drug dealers from Mexico. That's people on Wall Street. That's people right here in the United States that manufactured that and had, long list of documentation. And so, I'll be honest with you. Like I have talked to people this week. One of the hardest things for me, and I'm going to be honest about this entire show, not just this episode, but this entire show. And so anybody watching out there, I'm part of this show. I am on the left, and anybody that knows me definitely knows I'm left. I am part of this show because John and Lucy, Tiffany, everybody has reached out, people behind the scenes here, and they have made an honest effort to have a well-grounded conversation. And when I reach out to people from the left that absolutely don't want to be part of this conversation, I'm like, well, what is arguing on Facebook? What is putting up, these ridiculous memes and all this stuff do if you can't have an honest conversation? So I'm in a hard place here tonight. I'm here by myself, but that's not by choice. I have reached out to people on this. And so this argument that we're having right now, that whether you should be vaxxed, whether you should not be vaxxed, if the only way you can defend your point is to just post memes on Facebook and try to make fun of each other, I may not agree with someone else, but I'm at least willing to sit down and have that conversation. And I think right now, to me, even more so on whether you believe one way or another, is can you just sit down and have a conversation, even if you don't agree? There are things I don't necessarily agree with Lucy on, and I've talked to people this week about that. I will make that clear, but I'm at least willing to sit down and hear her out. And John and the rest, everybody else has been wonderful. And I think on this one topic, I just wanted to get that off my chest as a major frustration of, if you don't agree with people on the show, feel free to show up and express your voice. Because if you're not doing that, then I don't want to hear it.
Well said, Ed. I mean, I've been feeling that way quite a bit. And, you know, if you want, and on my Facebook, I have a variety of friends, and I try to be as open and honest and willing to listen as possible on things. And sometimes I get caught up in the deal, but you are so right. I mean, when the argument starts losing, the names start getting called. And, you know, we have on this show, if you're on Facebook, you can come on the comments and I'll put your comment up there. It's nice if you leave it to about about 10 or 15 words. If it's a long paragraph, then we ain't putting no, what was the Unabomber? We're not putting a manifesto up here on there. But if you have, wait, here. This is Dorn's comment. This is Lucy's husband, Dorn. This is his. He disagrees, Ed. I love the stupid meme wars. But you know, as long as you keep it as entertaining, and you know,
it's one thing when it's entertaining. It's another thing when it's getting in the way of the conversation.
Yeah, and that's, you know, I lost no friends during our discussions on that, and it is pretty back and forth. So stay tuned next Saturday. Last 2 Saturdays, I've made a COVID joke or comment that's really gotten a lot of people talking back and forth, and we just got to keep it civil. And I think that's why our show is somewhat successful. It is because we listen to all opinions, and I have found that, Ed, that it's, you know, some folks, they just don't want to, they'd rather just not talk about it. And, you know, they cannot, it's a lot easier for them to hate you if they don't know you. Unless it's my case, when they know me, they still can hate me. So it's okay. But I got a question for you. And this is going to be one for Dr. Stock later that I would like to ask you guys, or maybe a comment on this front of it. I mean, 2 things. One, follow the money. I mean, we've touched on that a little bit about the money involved. And Mark Small brought up the fact that the polio vaccine inventor just did it for the good of humanity. And I don't see that in this case. I mean, the Pfizer guy, he got he's getting some kind of prestigious award for his contribution, and they're making a fortune on it. But the other thing is, when you get an antibiotic from the doctor, they tell you to take the whole thing, and you don't really want to take that unless you really need it, because the thing you're fighting against will mutate and find a better way to be stronger. And then you have to have a bigger antibiotic. Does anybody think that this may be the case with the COVID vaccines? I mean, we're already seeing a booster. Is the booster going to have more in it? Man, there's just a lot of questions that I have. So Tiffany, I'm going to put you on the spot first, and just any of those things I brought up, to see if you have a comment about that.
Well, first off, I will tell you, if you're taking antibiotics, it's always important to take the entire course of antibiotics. That way you're able to kill the bug so that it has less of a chance of mutating. The worst thing you want to do is take like most of it and then stop and then stay ill without doing the full course. So that's number one. Number two, I remember when I was on active duty, they would give us, Ed, what do they give you? What does the military? Cipro. Yeah, that's the antibiotic of choice in the military. Cipro, just to knock everything out. I did a couple courses of that. You don't ever want to do that. But, they didn't believe in just kind of playing with it. They're just going to knock it out. But viruses mutate. We see it every year with the flu vaccine. It's a little bit more of this. It's a little bit more of that. Viruses mutate. We started with COVID and the Delta variant, and it will probably continue to mutate for the rest of our lives here on Earth. And there will always probably be some COVID in the background. And, we're probably going to get to the point where people are going to need boosters every year. Probably they'll probably start mixing it in the flu shot. I can remember when it was time for me to get a tetanus booster. They had mixed whooping cough in it because that was making a comeback. So I think that our healthcare system is going to get smarter, and they're going to find ways to give us a little bit of COVID as things go on. But I think one of the things that is most important is that we always continue to talk about ways to boost our natural immunity. As with everything in life, if you're talking about retirement, if you're talking about buying a house, if you're talking about anything, there's a level of personal responsibility that you need to understand and seek. And so, masks are 50-50. I enjoy socially distancing as much as possible. Socially, I'm going to take a step back. I'm not a close talker like I used to be. I certainly don't, I don't, kiss my friends like I used to, kisses on the cheeks and stuff like that. I'm more conscious of that. But I also, I'm also taking my vitamins, I'm washing my hands, I'm doing the things that I need to do to take care of my own immune system. So I think that that's something that that we're not talking about as it comes to COVID. But anytime you go to the doctor, what is your doctor going to tell you? Lose weight and exercise. Your doctor is always going to talk to you about putting you in charge of your health. But when it comes to this conversation, the first thing they want to throw on you is a vaccine. So I think that that part of the conversation is missing. And yes, I do still kiss the but sometimes you just have to understand that there's risk and just roll with the risk. Well played.
Yeah,
well played, Dorn.
Well, that Dorn, he's something else. The meatloaf, Ma, the meatloaf. I'll tell you what, that's funny. But yeah, those are good points, Tiffany. And you being in the pharmaceutical business and seeing the inside workings of that business really is critical on your take on the show this evening. And anytime we talk about the medical issues, because you've seen it, you've been there, and you know how it works. It's it's a lot about the money. And, it's like, Thor, he says, hey, it's about profits. And, I think that that is definitely creeps into the situation. So, Lucy, I gave you a little bit to chew on there. So unmute yourself there. And almost there.
There it is. There it is. Yeah, I'm happy with that trigger finger. This is about money. Let's make absolutely no mistake about this. Government sees its citizens as places to profit from. We are simply milk cows, and as long as we give milk, they can get taxes, and as long as we are useful to government, then we're allowed to stick around, right? Remember the Obama death care panels that in Obamacare where they're going to counsel people for the end of life? A lot of people didn't realize that there was a correlating problem with retirement accounts. I don't have time to get into that tonight, but let's talk about because that's another whole discussion about how they steal from us there. Let's talk about the revenue, and let's talk about the fact that we aren't in a true capitalist free market where there's a feedback mechanism, for example, for manufacturers being sued for this particular product. So let's talk about where manufacturers have been sued for particular products. Merck was sued for Vioxx. They killed tens of thousands of people with heart attacks. Hundreds of thousands had strokes just in this country. At the time, it was the largest class action lawsuit, over $2 billion with admitted criminal liability. Let's talk about Pfizer, who also has now, I think it has actually supplanted and replaced the Merck lawsuit. Pfizer was admitted criminal liability in their class action lawsuit for, wait for it, fraudulent marketing. So we have a company that has criminal history that is now being the purveyor of a mandatory substance that gets injected into you. So when you think about the average taxpayer as a cow, as cattle on the farm, we take our cattle and we brand them. We take our cattle and we steal our milk from them. We take our cattle and we restrict their travel. We take our cattle and we medicate them. We medicate their feed. We medicate their water. What is happening to Americans? Our travel is restricted. Our water is medicated with fluoride, which is another whole entire topic. Our food is medicated, even if it's with maybe good reason like vitamin D, milk and folate in the cereals, or actually folic acid. It should be folate, but it's folic acid. So this is a really big issue on the profit side. Adam's posting a link that's going to show that Pfizer revenue and profit is up 134%. and it's going from adjusted earnings of 7.7 billion, and then revenue soared to 24.1 billion. The vaccine business alone was responsible for more than 60% of the company's sales. People are getting rich on this. This is a big deal. This is a deal where it makes sense. I mean, how much does it cost to buy off a senator, right? How much does it cost to buy off a congressperson? And when you start tying things like a vaccine coverage rate to whether or not hospitals get reimbursed for Medicaid, every single thing lines up in dominoes, and it's all to topple the American taxpayer. So my position here is very simple. We are living in a society where people must stand up and say, no, my skin is where it stops. You know, government, you're already stealing from me in taxes. I have to pay rent on my house or you take it away, you know, in the form of property taxes. I'm going to draw a hard line right here. You're not getting that needle in my skin.
Yeah, I'm telling you, there's a lot of folks that are that way. And let's talk about let's talk about the kids being vaccinated. That's where we're sort of headed there. It's okay for that. And I don't see the benefit outweighing the risk for kids to get this done. I mean, they're not really very symptomatic on things, and so it's just a very slippery slope on what you should do. If you don't get them vaccinated, they say it's child abuse, and some would say if you get them vaccinated, that's child abuse. So, I'm going to come back to you, Ed, on this one, and you have some kids, and I don't want to bring your personal life into this too much, but hey, what do you think about the vaccine in your kids?
So I think Tiffany touched on this earlier, and what I would say is I think there's a lot of kids. We talked last week about where my kids go to school, so we're just going to go all in here. Where my kids go to school, if you go there in the afternoon, you're going to see a lot of grandparents. You're going to see a lot of elderly people taking care of their kids. The kids may not be symptomatic, may not be getting major effects from this. But you're talking about a high risk. We've talked about before. My mother is actually going through cancer treatment right now. So it does fall in that, and it's not. I would agree. I kind of skipped out on the last segment there. I would agree. I would fall in with Tiffany and Lucy. This is one of those things. I do very much believe that the conversation we're not having is about preventative medicine. I don't believe that we have a healthcare system in this country. I believe we have a sick care. We basically try to take care of the problem at the end. You can live your life however, but we'll try to avoid talking about responsibility at all. And so I do think there's that. I also think that we have a huge for-profit drug company, drug industry in this, and we want to spend billions on what we're considering illicit drugs, and let these other drug companies make billions while still harming people. And so I do very much agree there, but at the same time, like I said, I do see in certain communities, grandma, grandpa, people may have, elderly people at home that are, at risk. So I don't think it's fair to completely say, okay, well, the kids aren't necessarily dying from this or not having a problem. It's not a problem there. I think there are other circumstances that can impact that decision.
Oh yeah, kids can be super spreaders. Yeah.
Hey, I'm gonna stand right up and say, as a parent, I don't expect my child to be a human shield for me. I don't expect your child to be a human shield for me or my aging father. Okay, it is not up to the children to risk death and permanent disability and all of the unknown side effects of the vaccine, because the trial is not ending until 2025. I mean, we all know that, right? That we're actually in an emergency use authorization. It's an unproven vaccine. We don't know what it's going to do. So people that say, and the brainwashing that I'm seeing, oh, my child was crying.
I would contend that in a lot of the communities, especially coming up in the Hispanic community, that's not brainwashing from the government. That's how we were raised. That those people are, there is nobody that I'd lay down my life for my grandma, my grandpa, my mom, my dad, and so nobody's
But it's your
throwing that out there.
choice. It's not the government telling you that there's some magic
and
juice
and I'm
that's
saying
not
that
proven.
this isn't this when I'm talking about speaking to communities and people doing this for these reasons. I think there is a difference in different communities. Yeah, I can respect if people don't have that, but I don't see it as throwing the kids out as shields. So
Yeah, I mean,
that's a hard one because I do get the family orientation in the Hispanic community, especially. It's one of the most attractive things, the things that I admire most about the Hispanic community. So let's look at what happens to Black, Indigenous, and people of color with the U.S. government. Smallpox
Preach.
blankets, right? Tuskegee experiment, HeLa cells. These are just the things that we know about. And this is endemic. This is not something that was an isolated incident that happened in the past. This is from the very foundation of the history of our country all the way to now. And so we can't expect anything from our oppressors. We can't expect anything different than what we know from history. And what we know from history is that over and over and over again, everyone, but especially Black, Indigenous, and people of color, those communities have been preyed upon by the US government. And we can't expect that hand-in-hand relationship between corporations and government that is now creating unbelievable record profits for those same corporations who have lied to us over and over again, who have admitted criminal liability in these situations. What if somebody tells you who they are, believe them.
So I think one of the interesting things is I've worked with several people up here in Northwest Indiana working on food deserts where we have, minority or populations that you can't find a local place to pick up fresh fruits and vegetables. All you have is your local, liquor store or whatnot. And so I get what Lucy's saying. I understand that on the history. I would say it's not limited to the government and it's not necessarily limited to the pharmaceutical companies. That we do have just an overall problem. And like I said, I don't think we're doing enough to discuss these greater issues. There's a lot to play here beyond just the vaccine itself. And so I think that you do have these communities that I've said before, as I grew up and became an adult, there's things that I realized that person that we used to make fun of in the neighborhood when we were kids, they actually had a medical condition and they never went and, sought medical help for it. And some of those issues, now that we hit COVID, we've seen that if you're not taking care of yourself, that you're going to get hit with that. And so, I think there is a lot more to this that needs to be discussed than simply just the vaccine. But I know that's our topic tonight.
Yeah, we should definitely talk about food security. And I mean, it would be my dream to have Vandana Shiva on here, but I think we're so small potatoes for somebody like Vandana, but she is a personal hero of mine. But I think what it all boils down to is the business models are sick. The pharmaceutical companies only make money when we're sick. There's not a lot of incentive to bring fresh fruits and vegetables into those areas that are the food desert. And there's not much incentive to teach people to be independent. And so we're not taking those empty lots in Indianapolis or anywhere else. I mean, they are to a limited extent, and turning them into, free places that people can go grab apples off the tree. Why are we not doing that? And the people that are, we need to have here on the show so that people can see that good example. Because, something as simple as growing sprouts in a mason jar on your kitchen counter, that would revolutionize life for most people.
Well, Lucy, the Amish won't come on TV. I think that's in their Pledge of Allegiance or whatever. They no electricity and they won't come on TV. One of the questions that I have for you is, and I sort of know the answer to this, but I'm going to ask a rhetorical question. Are we just used to taking a pill to fix everything? And Adam brings up a good point here that's sort of interesting. And this is another marketing to kids type of thing. So Well, that's not his comment. There it is. Maybe we should talk about whether vaccinating cartoons like Big Bird is appropriate influence to children. So, either one of those you could talk about. And Tiffany, you're going to be up here. Big Bird, or are we
what
taking
was
a
the
pill?
first question? I got lost. with the
Monsanto poisonous seeds.
Are we just used to taking a pill to fix everything? Are we just gotten to the point where
Oh.
that lazy? And Ed talks about being physically fit, and I heard on the radio today about being physically fit is your best defense. And all the people I know that are physically fit are all cool with this COVID. It doesn't really get them. So
having worked with doctors in primary care, we are very much a take a pill society. As an undergrad, my degree was in exercise science. I wanted to go on to medical school, but it was my goal to learn as much about the human body as possible. And the best ways to take care of the human body are by eating appropriately and exercising it. When I started working in primary care with really great doctors who were seeing, between 3 and 4 or 5 patients an hour for visits, all of your great medicines are generic. Your blood pressure medicines, cholesterol, a lot of great diabetes medicines are all generic. And so you do get into an add a pill, add a pill, add a pill, add a pill. When I worked in long-term care, the average person in a nursing home is taking 9 meds, 9 pills a day. So, one system goes out of whack, you add another one. When people have metabolic syndrome, they are taking several meds to regulate and improve their bodily functions, where a lot of people probably need to eat more fruits and vegetables and probably take a 30-minute walk after dinner and maybe even walk in the morning. So, my background, my experiences, my education, eating right and exercising and being responsible for your health is very important. A lot of times, some people will have high blood pressure that's associated with kidney issues, but sometimes high blood pressure is a heart that needs to be exercised.
Yeah. And
cardio is important. And exercise isn't always meant to help you lose weight, but your blood circulates, it helps with water retention. When I worked at Johns Hopkins, the psychiatrist would tell me that once they got people stable on psych meds, they would tell them to exercise to improve their circulation so that the medicine got all over their bodies. Drinking water. Oh my gosh, how important is drinking water? So I just think that for me, this bigger COVID discussion has to be about overall health, because we are seeing that people who have comorbidities do not fare as well when they do contract COVID. It's hurting obese people with hypertension, your diabetics, it's hurting them. And there has to be a reason why it's hurting them. So something has to be said for taking this time during this pandemic to say, golly geez, golly gee, Paul, what can I do to reduce my risk for contracting COVID? And what can I do to boost my natural immunity? What can I do to improve my health during this time? And I will just share this final story with you. My dad is vaccinated, and his life has changed so much in the last year and a half. He used to go out all the time and do stuff. My dad's 80 years old, and during the last 18 months, he doesn't do as much as he used to do. I went to visit him, and we continued to socially distance. And it's sad to see how his life has been so limited because of all of this. Because he's fully vaccinated, but he's still very much afraid. So what have we done? We haven't empowered him to take control of his health.
Yeah, and I think that is part of the issue. I mean, I've heard so many stories about people that have been in the hospital and they die without any loved one by their side, but a nurse or a doctor or no one. And to me, that is just so sad that that's how things happen.
It's worse than sad. It's absolutely criminal. It is absolutely criminal to be separated from your loved ones at that time. And to see the videos of, grandma on the other side of the glass, and then to see them being wheeled away and taken away from their family members, and knowing that in Canada, and I don't know to the extent that this happened in the US, but I'm sure that it did. But in Canada, they know that elderly people died from dehydration during COVID because they were so badly neglected by the
Wow.
very people who are paid to take care of them. So we need to kind of like look at this. And one of the things I wanted to say and kind of add on to what you were saying, Tiffany, is that most people don't even know they have two circulatory systems. Most people are so ignorant about their body. They don't know where, their small intestine is, their large intestine. They don't know that they have a circulatory system for their heart, which is their heart and their blood. And they don't know that they have a lymph system, which your kinetic energy and you moving around is what actually causes that to circulate, and how bad stagnant lymph is. So,
yeah.
So I just want to bring it back to the liberty issue. A lot of people are citing Jacobson versus Massachusetts as saying, hey, the Constitution, the Supreme Court has ruled that it's okay, you can force a vaccine. Not true. There's a couple of problems with that thinking on that particular case. The first is it was a states' rights issue. The second is that the smallpox vaccine had been around for a very long time. The third is that the Jacobson, the subject of this, was never force vaccinated. He was never taken out of society. He was never separated from his ability to provide for his family. None of those kind of societal things were imposed upon him. And at the end of the day, he paid a $5 fine, which is equivalent to a couple $100 today. And his life went on as normal. Now, the other thing that's happened since Jacobson versus Massachusetts in 1905 is this little thing called the Nuremberg Code, where it was recognized that the fully informed voluntary consent of the subject must be given. What we have right now is no less than Joseph Mengele experimenting on children. We have people in government, remember, Joseph Mengele was part of the Nazi government, who are given access to children and are able to experiment on them. This is an experiment. We don't have trials with outcomes that are defined. We are in the middle of a trial by its very definition. And so what we have right now is to me, if real history is revealed later, that this will be seen as the biggest human tragedy ever.
Wow. And that's going to be a good spot here. I see Dr. Stock in the waiting room here. So we're going to go ahead and bring him on, see if I can get him out here, and I'll trade places with you. Dr. Stock, I'm telling you what, you are amazing, because I've seen you on Facebook Live already tonight. I know you're on another Zoom call. I didn't call you till 2 p.m. and you're still here. So you're definitely a high energy guy. And I know you're passionate about this. And I did reach out to your counterpart, Dr. Galvin, for a quick take from him. But he said he needed a little more heads up. He was pretty busy, and that's totally understandable. I appreciate any help that we get. So how are you doing, Dr. Stock, tonight? And bring us up to date, since I know it was 10 weeks ago when we were on the show, and I actually had COVID, and I'm completely recovered except for that taste thing. I still can't taste, but most people know I didn't have any taste in the beginning. So, hey, it's all good. Yeah. So, hey, how's it going?
Busy. Not doing the stuff I love. I'd rather be seeing patients, but right now I'm mostly teaching. My patients have been very gracious to let me quit being less of a doctor and be more of a teacher right now, mostly of legislators. But I probably spend about half my time right now with my patients and taking hardly no new ones because I just don't have time. Taking good care of the ones I got, but then spending the other half of it educating the population, especially legislators.
It seems to be a lot of information flying around it. Well, we just appreciate you being on here. And I'm going to start with Lucy, because I know Lucy's going to have some questions for you. And somehow we lost Tiffany in the thing. But, if you're from Indianapolis, I think half of the city was out from the Xfinity or Comcast or something like that. I heard everybody complaining about it. So that's probably what she's got there. So she'll probably pop back on. But Lucy, do you have a question for Dr. Stock?
I do. And Dr. Stock, I'm going to take you to task just a little bit because I think our views vary just a bit. You may know that I'm a married woman with
as bad as Forbes. Go ahead.
Probably not. I just don't. So in case you missed it, I have 10 kids that have never received even a single vaccine, only 2 of those born with OBs, the rest with midwives, 3 completely unmedicated births for my grandchildren, not a single vaccine for any of them. So we're really trying to do things right from a natural perspective. We pay a lot of attention to what we eat, what herbs we take to support our health. I am under the firm belief. I have the firm belief that there is no good vaccine. And so I think that I've heard you say, correct me if I'm wrong, that some vaccines might be appropriate. And one thing that I really hate is when people say, I'm not anti-vax, but I think people should go get the COVID vaccine or something like that. So I'm going to put you on the spot and ask you, do you believe that there are any good vaccines? Because I don't believe that there is a single vaccine that is either safe or effective for what they claim it to be. So let me put you on the spot right off the gate.
So I hate the term safe and effective because they're black and white discussions of something which is not black and white. So if I had somebody, if you brought me right now and said, hey, Dan, your kid has got adequate zinc, selenium, iron, iodine, vitamin D, lives in a non-biotoxic environment and doesn't have a antigen presentation genetic problem, do you think he'd be better off getting measles on his own or taking the vaccine? And I'd tell somebody, well, that vaccine's good enough, I'd let him take it. But I also want people to know that I can make a defense for every single mother and father who doesn't want to take an MMR vaccine. Because there is a very good argument that's never been answered, which is, hey, if you were to take a group of people who had adequate zinc, selenium, iron, iodine, vitamin D, and weren't biotoxin exposed, and you did a study of MMR vaccine versus placebo, would it show any short or long-term benefits? And the answer is, I'm not sure, and nobody's ever done the study. It'll never be done. And I can honestly make the argument that if I gave someone adequate zinc, selenium, iron, iodine, vitamin D, and remove their biotoxin exposure, that they would do just as well without the vaccine. These vaccines still have their own little problems, all right? To be a perfect vaccine, you have to enter through the same portal of entry that the pathogen does. So if you had an inhaled MMR vaccine with this weakened virus, that's really the junior varsity, I'd feel even more comfortable with that than I would with our present MMR. Well, I would give my own kid MMR if I had everything taken care of. If my wife said, well, I don't want to give him MMR, I wouldn't fight hard on that. Most of the problem of any pathogen is not the pathogen, it's the immune system. Otherwise, the pathogen would have wiped out the entire human species.
Exactly.
And so your argument, you and I aren't so far apart. If anybody said, hey, Dan, would you gamble on the vaccine versus nothing? I'd say, well, for the MMR vaccine, I probably would. If you said, are you going to gamble $1,000? You're like, well, not 1,000. No, I might do 10. And so I want everybody to understand that just because I'm not anti all vaccines doesn't mean that I'm pro any vaccine.
That's a good distinction. Very good distinction.
Yeah,
because the problem with the MMR vaccine, of course, goes all the way back to 2002 when Julie Gerberding was the head of the CDC, and she completely suppressed that study that was done with Dr. William Thompson, which showed that the MMR vaccine actually was correlated to a 360% higher risk if you're male and Black and got the vaccine at 12 months versus 36 months. And of course, that was all suppressed. And then we have Dr. William Thompson, one of the co-authors of that study, who came forward just about 4 years ago to say, hey, we committed scientific fraud on that particular study. So the one vaccine that has been studied in relationship to autism was actually totally debunked by the very co-author of it. So I'm not a fan of any vaccine.
Point of interest here. Can you explain what the MMR vaccine is for? I mean, you guys are talking some vaccine terms here. What's that?
It's a live virus vaccine against measles, mumps, and rubella.
Okay. Okay.
To give both sides of the argument, we're all pretty sure that getting measles can throw you into autism as well.
Well, I've actually seen that more correlated to congenital rubella. And the other problem with the mumps component of the measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine, you may know this too, Dr. Stock, we have a current 10 years ongoing whistleblower lawsuit, which showed that in order for the U.S. government to purchase the MMR vaccine, that mumps component had to have a certain percentage of antibody coverage. And the fact of the matter is when they manufactured the vaccine, it didn't. And so the researchers who have come forward as the whistleblowers revealed that they were instructed by their superiors to take antibodies from rabbits, spike the sample sent to the FDA so that the necessary coverage would be there. So now we have an ineffective mumps vaccine. Then we have Andrew Wakefield, the gastroenterologist from the UK, who had just a small little paper he did, but he found 14 children with measles type virus from the vaccine. So vaccine type measles virus living in the guts of those children. And out of those 14 kids, when they were treated appropriately for their gastroenterological symptoms and the measles vaccine was killed in their colons, 9 of them started speaking and hadn't spoken in years. So we won't even get to the part of the rubella where I don't know how many babies did they abort? How many babies? Like 38 just for the rubella vaccine alone. So anyway, I'm really passionate about this. This is like my jam, is defending babies against vaccines.
Well, I think when we need to understand that when we talk about a vaccine injury, the question is, would the vaccine have done worse or any differently than the true infection would have? And
certainly with the added vaccine ingredients, I think there's a compelling argument that it would, because as you mentioned, you have original antigenic synthesis. With pertussis, we're supposed to get pertussis through our nose into our primary immune system through the lungs and then through the secondary blood immune system, which is why people that take the pertussis vaccine, the DPT shot, when it enters into their bloodstream first instead of through their nose, they never get that response like they're supposed to, and they never will, because of original antigenic synthesis. So now you have a situation where they're all asymptomatic carriers. So they are asymptomatic, and yet they are spread. This is how my kids got pertussis years ago, was from one of their friends who was vaccinated. They were asymptomatic, but they were still spreading it to my kids, unfortunately. So yeah, I mean, you start adding mercury and aluminum.
A little bit more complicated on that one, because the original DPT vaccine was actually pretty good and didn't do that. It's when we went to the acellular vaccine.
Right. The whole cell was very much more effective.
Right.
However, it had its other problems, which led to the 1986 National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act, because Barbara Loe Fisher, who started the National Vaccine Information Center, it was her child in that lawsuit which kind of sparked the whole NVIC.
So I think we need to understand, though, that when we look at people who are injured by a vaccine, these people very frequently have the very same problems that would make them get injured by the virus. Now, that is not an argument for a vaccine over natural infection, all right? That is something to be considered as one makes the decision that should be left to every individual parent. In fact, when I get down to this, for a lot of these diseases, what we're fighting over, if we're going to fix the immune system, all right? And at the end of the day, guys, that's the big prize, is fix the immune system, right? But if we're going to fix the immune system, yeah, thank you, Tiffany. If we're going to fix the immune system, then we're fighting over, well, which is better, if I hit you with a spitball or if I hit you with a rubber BB? And I tell somebody at this point, it's, okay, guys, this should be a calm decision. That's not right or wrong. Certainly should never be in any way coerced financially or otherwise, because we're fighting over spitballs versus BBs. And if we don't fix the immune system, then it frickin' doesn't matter. You're going to get hurt one way or the other. Again, now you're talking about cannonballs versus shells. You get hurt one way or the other. And so in neither case does it have any importance that there be any governmental involvement in this at all. All right? This is not a governmental decision. It's not something which has any impact on anyone except the patient who may or may not take that vaccine.
Absolutely. And I think throwing up public health as a compelling reason to force people to take medication against their will is a total canard.
Bloody lie. That's a bloody lie. Especially with these COVID-19 vaccines, but we don't have any data that says if I vaccinate John for measles, mumps, and rubella, that it reduces my chance of getting measles, mumps, and rubella any better than if I just take the vaccine. And so the whole idea that there's any public health to a vaccination is nonsense. Vaccines change the immune function of the person who takes the vaccine and no one else.
That's gold right there. What you said is gold.
Yeah, I'm going to be selfish as the host. I'm going to have a question for you.
All right.
What about, if you get vaccinated and you actually get COVID and you're asymptomatic and you go out in public, are you spreading that virus? This is more of a question. And,
yes. You are, but just think what would happen if you get an asymptomatic infection without being vaccinated, except it appears like the vaccinated do shed more, at least with Delta variant, because they're not good at fighting Delta variant. But I tell somebody this is true of every vaccine we've ever made. The story I love people know about, I think it was 2014, mumps went running through the National Hockey League. And the pro-vaccine people all were saying, well, the only people who got symptomatic mumps were the people who were unvaccinated or had unknown vaccine status. And I'd say that's great, but the problem with your whole argument, half of the people who came down with mumps had no contact with another person who was unvaccinated or unvaccinated unknown status. So where'd they get the virus? from the vaccinated guys in the locker room. They got infected. They didn't have any symptoms. They shed mumps out asymptomatically, and some unvaccinated guy came down with it. So they were still shedding the virus, even though they were vaccinated. People have this idea that somehow vaccines like this force field that comes around you, and now the virus can't ever get to you at all. That's not how vaccines work. You get infected after you get a vaccine. You just don't get symptoms if the vaccine works well, which COVID-19 vaccines don't. But you still get infected. You still shed virus. That's why measles isn't gone. All right, measles isn't gone.
So a follow-up question is: did the Delta variant come from the people that got vaccinated?
Yes, because it's an enhanceable variant. You made people have an abnormal immune system response that had very weak cytotoxic T cells responses, but had enormous antibody production. That means that all you need now is some variant to come along who these antibodies don't neutralize it. They actually make it more infectious. And now you've got a variant that takes over the entire population that's vaccinated and starts taking down all the naive, unvaccinated people because they're having huge amounts of virus shed on them from the vaccinated people. And we saw that with the RSV virus. We saw it with dengue virus. We're seeing it with COVID-19, at least the best data suggests that's what we're seeing, that yes, the reason Delta is here is because we made a whole group of people who couldn't fight it because they were vaccinated.
Wow. And that's, I made it a year and a half without getting it. And then I probably got this 90 people. It ended up being 90 people from our church got it from one Sunday service. And I know last time we were on the show, I was probably at the height of it. I got it on, I got sick on Saturday and our show was Tuesday. But by then, I was fine. I just stayed away from people, and my taste and smell was about the only thing that really is that noticeable on this. But so these are just sort of questions that I ask. And, you ask that question on social media and people automatically jump to the conclusion that you're fighting with them or you're arguing or whatever. No, I have real questions about these things. And I find that a lot of people don't really want to know an answer if it doesn't fit the everybody should get vaccinated stance.
Well, it's a scary thing to consider that your government's lying to you. And a lot of people would rather not know that reality is true. They would like to believe that there is a simple protect me solution. And sometimes facing a complicated reality makes some people choose to go into a simple fantasy, unfortunately.
Yeah. And so, Lucy's got I'm sorry, Ed and Tiffany, I'm taking all your questions here, but Lucy's got the VAERS website numbers up there. And, there's controversy on every single segment of this topic. What is your thoughts about the VAERS? I mean, there's some people out, it's a bunch of made up hooey, it's false reviews, it's blah, blah, blah. So
when it comes to vaccine side effects and risks, it's not perfect data. But the research on these vaccines has been done so badly that it is the best data we have. And it clearly looks bad on VAERS. And it looks bad on VAERS, even if you don't accept that there's around 250,000 cases that have been censored on VAERS, where they're actually scrubbing the database. That's data I get from a colleague of mine who is actually doing a computer download of VAERS and looking for all the missing case numbers. Because there are a lot of missing case numbers, approximately 250,000, he tells me. He's compiling that data for me now. So I tell you, you can insult VAERS as being low science. Right, it is. Everything about this vaccine program is low science. This has been the most badly botched thing in medicine I've ever seen. But I tell somebody, since we're going to have to make our best call on botched science, VAERS makes this vaccine look very, very bad, and the best decision you can make based upon the data we have from this bad VAERS system is that these vaccines are actually more harm than they are good. I should mention, it was about 2 weeks ago now that there was a meta-analysis study published where they actually took the J&J study, the Pfizer study, and the Moderna study and combined them all into one big meta-analysis and asked the question, what was the net benefit and risk of the vaccine? And at that point, they had a population so large that they could actually answer that question. And the answer came down that there was no change in death between vaccination and non-vaccination. but vaccination increased your overall risk of being hospitalized, and it statistically significantly increased your overall risk of missing time from work and activities because of illness, meaning that the net sum of this vaccine was harm. And that's in placebo-controlled randomized blinded trial of very, very healthy people. What numbers you would get if you rolled that out into a group of less healthy people who had skunkier immune systems, I can only imagine it will look worse. So when you're doing the best guess you can from VAERS, combined with the placebo-controlled randomized blinded data that we have, COVID-19 vaccines right now, the mRNA and DNA vaccines look like a very bad gamble.
Yeah. And I would definitely say, in children that, I don't know how this got dreamt up that, kids are at such risk, and it just seems like we're going down a rabbit hole.
I know how it got dreamt up. It got dreamt up in the boardroom with the marketing department when they said, hey, look, here's another market we can open up. How many millions of people are there in the 5 to 11 age group, in the 12 to 18?
As a matter of fact,
that's how it happened.
On the 5 to 11 is even worse. They didn't even bother to see if it would prevent people from having disease, hospitalization, or death. All they did was take about 4,500 kids and say, hey, can you get antibody levels that are near what we got from the older kids? So first of all, that means you're taking data from post-pubescent children and applying it to prepubescent children. And second of all, you're using antibodies, which have nothing to do with fighting viral infections. They're not even a good marker of immunity to viral infections. As a matter of fact, people who are developing antibody-dependent enhancement routinely have much higher antibody levels than people who are naturally recovered. I have a patient of mine who got vaccinated. She has antibody levels that are 100 times the antibody levels of a naturally recovered person, and has not had a healthy day since she got vaccinated. So the idea that we're going to even make a decision on these 5 to 11 without any clinical data, none, we're going to make it just upon antibody levels, which don't matter, and don't predict immunity. Now we're into fantasy land. And Pfizer's even admitted that it thinks that the risk of myocarditis hospitalization is probably greater than the risk of COVID-19 hospitalization.
There's no downside. We can't sue them. We've got the National Vaccine Injury Compensation Program, and most people don't know that that does not actually cover the COVID vaccine. There's an entirely separate waiver of liability for the COVID vaccines, which is not funded. I think they've had 4 people that have gotten paid out on that, and that there's just not enough money there. So yeah, no downside. Yeah,
the argument for kids, when kids aren't going to die to begin with, they have over 99.9% survival on this. They're not going to get hospitalized for this for any amount of money. The reason they only did 4,500 kids is, frankly, if they wanted to do a study to show clinical endpoints, they would have had to do a study of probably 500,000 children. And at that point, the side effects would have come up. And so, guys, this is cooked. This isn't science anymore. This is fact soup. All right. We're just going out and getting the stuff that tastes good and is profitable. We're ignoring anything that might not be profitable. We don't care if it describes reality accurately or not. This has got the data for the children 5 to 11 is just ridiculous. There's, even if you heard the discussion of the FDA panel that was giving its opinion on that, most of them were saying, well, we don't really have good data. We're not really sure. It's the reason if we don't approve it, anybody who wants it won't be able to get it. I mean, they said, without, like they said, we have good data that says you should do this. So
yeah, it's pretty insane when you also take into account that US and New Zealand are the only countries on the whole planet that allow pharmaceutical companies to market directly to consumers through commercials. And that's created an untenable situation where the majority of media revenue now comes from pharmaceutical companies. So in a very literal, real, correlated sense, your MSM is the mouthpiece of pharma because they're being paid to be that.
Yeah, I mean, when the government itself isn't being the marketing arm, yes. But between the media and the government, they've got all their marketing done. That's why Pfizer isn't doing any advertisements for its vaccine.
Yeah, there's no reason to.
That would just entail risk that they don't need to take because they've already got their marketing being done for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And if they were to advertise on TV, the rules for that advertising is that at the end, they would have to have that very fast voice describing all of the known adverse events. Um, I don't know, man. We're living in Brave New World, 1984, Clockwork Orange. I mean, we're just living in all those dystopian novels all at the same time.
Well, one of the reasons that when I speak with legislators here, I try and convince them that, guys, what you're looking at right now is the Czechoslovakia of Nazi Germany. It already has nothing to do with science. Dr. Fauci's quite happy to lie to people and even admit he's lied to people. And he thinks that lying is a valid tool of government. So at this point, ladies and gentlemen, I tell him, look, this has got greater implications than just death or protection from COVID-19. Your government's for sale. And it's been so brazenly sold now, they're not really interested in even making sure they're lying to you anymore.
Yeah, that is interesting. It's been requested that Ed ask a question because he is our left person, but I think that he's been very brave tonight, and we've been giving him a little bit of a hard time about it. But I'm with him on his opinion at all times. So
I'd like to hear all voices. So
yeah, that's exactly right. We did have somebody in our chat here that was.
I can preach to Lucy the rest of the night. It won't change anything.
Oh, I'll tell you, I just sit here and listen for the whole time. I just and I did selfishly get a couple of my own questions in there, but I'm just more curious. I'm just like listening to this and trying to take in what I can and just trying to figure it all out. So Ed, tell me I have a question for Dr. Stock here. That try to stump him. I dare you.
Oh, I probably won't stump him. First of all, I'm going to say I have a tick, and this is my own personal journey with medicine. I have about half the doctors I go to tell me that ticks don't exist. The other half will tell me they do, but they can give me a pill and it was amazing. I met an engineer from NASA that they worked for. They worked on nutrition for the astronauts and did a bunch of research. And he took one look at me during the conversation and said, "Stop eating salt." And I said, "What do you mean?" And he goes, "Stop putting table salt on your food." And my wife now will absolutely tell you, like, I can try to sneak in some food that I'm not supposed to be eating. And my wife would be like, "He had something salty," because your head just gives it away. And so I do have, I may be on the left, but I do have those reservations with the medical community. One of the things I would ask you, and I've heard everything you say, how do we fix this? I've seen some studies out of Canada and some other places. Also, I've had allergies forever. I've seen some really compelling, studies that show that children, surviving traumatic experiences in the home, whether it's a divorce, whether it's a bankruptcy in the family, something like that, those children, we see a huge spike. We have this idea that everything is a medical, emergency, but we kind of leave out, you spoke before about, the environmental impact a little bit, and what I don't get the hyperfixation right now. And I do get it, but you're having a chance to speak with legislators. How do we fix this? How do we get to looking at, just because this one crisis comes along, or however you want to dictate this, how do we get back to, we've talked tonight about eating healthy, taking care of yourself. How do we bring this shit back together? Because I think that's one of the things that we both can agree on, that, that we have a health crisis in this country. And so how do we bring that in?
Quite simply, we need to take the money away from governments, insurance companies, employers, and give it back to the patients. Right now, you have to remember, and I tell someone, if you go to see your doctor and he takes insurance, you don't have a contract with him. The insurance company does. He has a contract with the government for Medicare and Medicaid, but he has no contract with you. He doesn't work for you, actually. Therefore, what pays him to study is the stuff that the insurance company, the government, whoever that third party who's doing the paying will do. So the most important thing we do to fix this system is get the money back in the hands of the consumer. One of the things I tell people, the reason it's good for us to pay tax dollars to buy an army tank is because I, as an individual, don't need an army tank. You, as an individual, don't need an army tank. But as a country, we need army tanks, all right? But healthcare is not consumed at the level of the population the way safety and law enforcement is. It's consumed at the level of the individual. Therefore, it's only efficiently served when the individual is buying the service. And right now, you have to understand that every doctor who's taking third-party payment works for that third party, not for the patient. Therefore, when that third party says, look, if you want to get paid, you're going to study the things I tell you to study, and they have control over what these doctors go study. You're going to give the advice I want to give, and you're not going to give the advice I don't want given, because if you do, I'll use your non-compete, non-contract clause to bankrupt you. So in fact, I'm a direct pay doctor. I only take money directly from patients. I don't bill insurance companies, governments, employers, any of that. The reason my patients are very comfortable with me is they know they can kick my hiney to the curb anytime they want to. So it's Stan, look, you lie to me and we're done, all right? I pay you to read a whole bunch of stuff as thoroughly as you can. And if somebody from a drug company comes to give you some foo-foo, you tell them I don't need your foo-foo. I need your original research because I got to read this because I got to sit down with my patient and I got to explain this in a way that won't make me look like a bloody idiot. So the most important first step, get the money back in the hands of the patient and get it away from everybody else, an unfettered medical spending account. The second thing we need to do, and one of the things I'm working and trying to push the legislators here in Indiana to do, is to pass a law to ban any doctor from having in his contract with any other party a non-compete, non-contact clause. Because right now, that's what they use to threaten doctors into compliance. Because they can tell them, hey, look, you know, if I fire you, you have to move 10 to 50 miles away from where you practice. You're not allowed to tell your patients where you're going. You're not allowed to advertise in this area for another year to 2 years sometimes. You know, the doctor business capital is the faith that his patients have in their advice and their ability to get to him. When that can be taken from them, the doctor basically has been bankrupted and all of his years of service are gone. He has to start over again. And starting practices is very expensive. So the second thing is to just take away the non-compete, non-contact clause. And if we can get the state of Indiana and other states to ban that, then we have consumers who have the money in their pocket, providers who have no one to serve but the guy who has the money in his pocket, and no reason not to leave employment from these third-party situations. Most doctors in this thing hate this, and I can tell you that because I can tell you in the hoopla that came up after my video came out, I had 2 doctors who reached out and said anything negative. I had 1,000 who reached out who all said the same thing. And routinely what they said was, thank you for speaking out. We would, but we're scared. The third thing is we need to have reform of medical licensing board or just do away with medical licensing boards. I have to tell you, medical licensing board does no good for anybody. Just having a registry where we verify that somebody went to this or that school and did this or that residency, that should be adequate for people to make a decision. Medical licensing boards can't tell a smart doctor from a dumb doctor because there's no black and white here. And so those things alone, getting the money back in the hand of the patient, freeing doctors from their non-compete, non-contact clauses, and taking away the cudgel of this medical licensing board, now the doctor has no one to pay attention to but the guy on the exam table. And then we will actually become again what we always wanted to be, what I very much enjoy being now, which is the servant to the guy on my exam table. And that's the solutions for this, and the only ones I can see. There is no governmental solution that's going to fix healthcare. This is not consumed at the level of a population. It's consumed at the level of the individual.
Yeah, and you are channeling some Milton Friedman, the a famous economist. He was a big poo-pooer of licensing, and I agree. It makes a club, and you know what George Carlin said, it's a club, and you ain't in it. And
yeah,
that's pretty much how this goes. It was like when we were in college. You know, we wanted to have a party, and we made it exclusive. Not everybody can get in. That was what's made our party so good. So it's, you know, that's a simple analogy, but sort of darn true. Well, Tiffany, I'm going to give you last question. If you
can I ask Ed how I did with my answer?
Oh, yeah. Oh, I loved it. I loved it. I thought you did great.
Thank
So
you.
Ed's waiting for his money so he can go to go to his doctor and say, "Hey, I got my own money now. Give me the old salt diet thing." That was pretty
You
easy
learn
there.
more from an engineer about your tick than you did from your doctor.
I did.
I didn't
And
give
I
you the
think
same advice.
I think the other people on this show can tell you Ed is always good with getting the money out. Yeah. So yes, you
Yeah,
hit. Yes.
well, that makes the point of, are we not over medicated and over prescribed to on a lot of cases? And
We are.
maybe this whole
No question.
COVID thing is a knee jerk reaction to
Yeah.
political pandemic, whatever. But you can't hide the fact that people have died from it, and that it is serious. And many people have not been able to visit their loved ones as they died. It's just been a very very trying time for over the last couple of years, when this is going on 2 years, and we're still cooking right along. A lot of questions haven't been answered. So before we go to the conspiracy theory segment of our program, Tiffany, do you have one last comment, word, or question for Dr. Stock?
Dr. Stock, thank you for being on. I really appreciated your answer to how to fix the healthcare system. I think it's spot on. The folks on the show know I used to work in pharma, and it was very frustrating to work with wonderful doctors just to know that what they could prescribe was determined by what the layman at the insurance company felt good about covering, or whatever was already laid out by another contract. So definitely, I think insurance as we know it is not best for folks. I think about the time when I worked in corporate America. I paid a lot every month for health insurance and consumed very little of it. And now my healthcare is done through a different system. And it's interesting. So with the change of season, I was like, well, can I get a happy light? Can you write for a happy light for me? And they're like, no, we don't cover that. So I had to go on Amazon to get a happy light and to get some light bulbs. But sometimes the answers can be just that simple. So thank you for helping to make something that's complex more simple and easier for the layman, the person on the streets to deal with, because it shouldn't be puzzling. It's kind of like Ed with reducing table salt. There are things that we can do to improve our own health. And you are a fast talker. So what was it? Zinc, iodine, what?
Zinc, selenium, iron, iodine, and vitamin D. Those 5 things if you get those optimized, those 5 things are going to make most immune systems work, so that most pathogens are not really going to have much time doing it. You may still get illness from them. You may still get COVID-19, but it's going to be 5 days of ivermectin and it's done, and you're going to respond in 36 hours and be over.
Ooh, okay. So quick question. Number one, Ed and I are former militaries. You got to make an acronym for that. You got to, make it an acronym so that people can follow it.
Right now?
No. In your spare time, like you have a ton. But can you talk to us about the new COVID pill? Is it Pfizer that they're working on? Can you talk a little bit about that? And that will be my final question.
Yeah. Pfizer and Merck both have one coming out. They're both less effective than ivermectin. The Merck drug's about 70% effective, I think, as saw in their trial. And the ivermectin's checking in around 85% if you use it, early in treatment. Ivermectin's about $10 if you get the horse paste versus $770, which is what I think the government's paying for Merck's drug. Pfizer's drug, which I understand is actually just a modified ivermectin. That's what I've been told. I actually don't know what the specifics of that particular agent are. But I've heard them crowing about 90% effective, which is right on line with ivermectin. I don't know much about its side effects. And when they come up with a 90% effective, you have to ask, well, who are you treating with this? Pfizer is probably the most deceptive pharmaceutical company I've ever seen. No one cooks a trial like Pfizer. I'm seriously. They're notorious for it.
Thanksgiving turkey, huh?
Yeah, I'd read a Merck study and I'd read it in 10 minutes and feel like I had done a good job. Pfizer studies took 20 because you had to find all the ways they were hiding everything. And their 90%, I'm going to bet, is by cherry picking a population. I don't know much about Pfizer's drug. The only thing I can tell people is it's not going to be cheap, and it's not going to add anything to what we can already do with zinc, selenium, iron, iodine, vitamin D, and ivermectin, and hydroxychloroquine if you're acutely low on zinc, and we have to use that along with it, that or quercetin. God forbid methylene blue, which you can have complement. I've never used that methylene blue, but the guys who've used it say it works very well as well. This is something else that's very inexpensive, very low in toxicity. We actually use it to sterilize plasma when we're collecting it from plasma people because it kills off viruses so well. We don't really need Pfizer's drug. I tell you, I have no reason why I would be able to sit down with any human being and tell them, you should spend a lot of money on Pfizer's drug. There's just the problem is we've already got this thing solved. COVID-19, if you're allowed to treat early with the right stuff, is a nothing burger. I mean, I hate to sound dismissive, but guys, this isn't that. First of all, it's been hyped out of control. It's not that hard to treat. The key is don't do what the government says. Their message is go home till you're ready for the ventilator and then come back. If you start, especially if you start 25 hydroxy vitamin D, which you can now get over the counter as a product called Develop, D.VELOP. I have a local pharmacy here, which I'm hoping is going to be shortly stocking it. So you get acutely ill, you can go down and get it. Between that, zinc, selenium, iron, iodine, vitamin D. Iron's hard to fix on the short term. So we may need some ivermectin, maybe some hydroxychloroquine. We don't need Pfizer's drug. I mean, we just really don't.
Yeah, it seems like they're getting a little greedy at this point.
A little?
Well, I'm trying to be nice. I mean, I don't want to be a tyrant all the time. So,
it's like being nice to Hitler. It doesn't work. Here, have a little Czechoslovakia. Will that make you happy? It won't.
No, and even you got Paris and all the wine, and I know that made Tiffany mad when they invaded Paris with all the wine and whatnot. So yeah, this has been a long show. She's drank at least 2 glasses of wine during the show, so that's how we tell. But hey, we appreciate you staying up with us, and last second coming on, and you just you made our show. You put a cherry on top of our show. I think it's been good. I know we didn't touch a lot on the vaccine for children, but I think that what we did talk about is very much in line with what's going on with everybody, and I think everybody just needs to take a breath. And we're seeing data come in, and and we'll just see where we go. And hopefully,
it's very easy. It's got worse data than any other vaccine for any other age group. Just don't do it.
Yeah. Well, and that's my thing. I had COVID, and it was, I hate to say I was disappointed it wasn't worse, because I know people have had a very, very, very hard time with it. But it's a very sensitive topic these days. So we're going to go to the conspiracy theory. If you want to stick around for that, Dan, I know you've had a long day, or you don't. You can watch our expressions. A lot of people like to stick around or not. It doesn't matter. But I'll give you a couple parting words before we go to the silliness of our show. So give us your latest take on the situation in 32 seconds.
COVID-19?
Just whatever you want to say, whatever's on your mind.
Vote for the Convention of States, guys. We have to take our power away from the federal government. If we don't do this soon, guys, look, they're so brazenly lying and doing horrible things to people. This is Nazi Germany in the early stages, guys. Stop it now. Convention of States, call your state legislator, beat them to death. Make sure you get a vaccine non-discrimination bill. Vaccine status needs to be a protected class so that we can stop them here in Czechoslovakia.
I do think that sentiment is growing about the government. Well, let's see if all these groups can come together and have a solution. So I'm going to go ahead and play the conspiracy theory thing. So hopefully everybody's got their little tinfoil hats and everything ready to go. So, hey, here you go. Hey, y'all, it's time for the conspiracy theory. So you better get your tinfoil hat out and let's see what's going on this week. All right. I'm going to put everybody in order here. There we go. So, wow, another week already, and it's time for conspiracy theory. And I'll tell you, you could do a lot. And I want to start with Lucy because if it doesn't have Bill Gates in this conspiracy
It does.
theory,
It does.
we're gonna be disappointed. So go ahead, Lucy, fire away.
Okay. Well, in my normal vein, this is conspiracy fact because I do like to back up everything with facts. So let's start with the Georgia Guidestones, about an hour and a half east of Atlanta, where there are kind of like the 10 commandments for the New World Order, and they lay out exactly what they have in mind for us. The very first thing that they lay out is to reduce the population to 500 million to a sustainable number, right? So I don't know how you get rid of 7.5 billion people. But I think that the COVID-19 vaccine and all of this is a pretty good way to do it. War is inefficient, takes time to manufacture bullets, kind of messy to kill people. It's a lot easier if you can convince people to just line up, get a shot in their arm, and die. And so I do think that this is a pivotal point in the New World Order, the cabal's plan to reduce the population. Now, what happens to the people who don't just die because they've got some selenium and zinc and iodine and, iron in their system, right? Maybe they got some adequate vitamin D, so they didn't die right away. Well, the next most efficient way to reduce the population is to sterilize it. So I think we're going to see an explosion of infertility like we've never seen before in the children that are getting the COVID vaccine now when they become of childbearing age. Where does this tie into Bill Gates? Well, Bill Gates did say that vaccines were a 20-to-1 investment for him, the best investment he'd ever made. Ahead of the situation that we have now, he invested in every single company that was making the vaccines so that he'd be able to gather all of that energy in the form of money. So yeah, it's Bill Gates all the way.
Well, you've never failed to disappoint. Maybe we can get Bill Gates to come on the show. That would be interesting.
Put me in the room with him. We'll solve the Bill Gates problem.
Yeah, that's going to be a non-taped performance because I know you'll have to use some cuss words and that
judo chop.
Yeah, judo chop. Get him. So Ed, what do you have for us this fine Tuesday evening?
Maybe we could have Ed on that episode to talk about Monsanto seeds. So I am gonna stick up for Lucy, and as anybody's seen on this show or any other seen before, I have blasted people for this is a personal decision to me. And so my conspiracy theory this week has to go by the guy who's in the news, Mr. Aaron Rodgers, who is afraid of the media coming after him and everything else. And we're talking about a guy who was in the media all summer long for holding out, not coming to play with his team, practice with his team. A guy who said, instead of going to practice with his team, did Jeopardy over the summer. Just to be clear, the media, the same media he's complaining about, they created this. This is my conspiracy. They gave him 3 NFL MVPs. That's right. The AP, the media, is who votes on NFL MVPs. They gave him 3, despite only producing 1 Super Bowl. They just did it all so they could save it up for this one story. To this, Aaron, they created this. This is on them. But Lucy, I tip my hat, and I also tip my hat to anybody who's willing to actually stand up for what they believe in and not try to sidestep the situation.
Yeah, and Aaron Rodgers is sort of the spokesman, has been the target of a lot of animosity in different ways, and it just keeps evolving in different things. So, being the sports fan that you are, I know that one sort of hit. And now, are you a Packers fan, Ed?
Yeah, if you couldn't tell by that answer, no.
I didn't think so. I just, sometimes we had to clear up the MMR thing earlier on the vaccine thing for some of the dumb people in the audience, but I never had to get that thing. But so, I didn't think you were. But they are green and gold, sort of like the Irish, right? I mean, so, I just thought maybe.
Kind of, sort of not. Yeah.
Not really. I do have a friend that has stock in the Packers. So that's because I guess they're owned by the people instead of a instead of one person, if that's not publicly traded or whatever. So
Right.
Tiffany, any news on the dating scene? Anything you got going on there? I mean, it seems like we're not doing mostly conspiracy theory tonight. We might be doing prophecy and other things.
So I don't call it dating. I call it trapping, something that is elusive. It's more like hunting. It's a conspiracy theory that exists. I mean, is he really out there? Is he real? So as you know, a couple weeks ago, I told you, trapped him, had him in the basement. I attempted to hobble him, only broke one ankle, and he tried to make a run for it. So,
So we need to start calling you Kathy Bates then, right? Is that what I'm hearing?
So he got into the woods. I'm going to have to try to recapture him this weekend. Wish me luck. He can run far, but he can't go fast. So I'll see what I can do.
Are we going to see this on TikTok?
Yeah, we need a TikTok.
I'm expecting a new TikTok channel.
Yeah, new TikTok video.
They'll be more like an Amber Alert.
And if you don't hurry up, it's going to be a silver alert. So,
I know, right?
Hey, that just leaves me. So I'm going to go with more prophecy than a conspiracy theory. So I don't know if you remember that guy, the governor, Andrew Cuomo or whatever. I don't know if you remember at the start of the pandemic how famous he was on how well he was doing handling the other thing. It's so interesting what a year brings, isn't it? How things can change. So I'm thinking about this guy from Pfizer that's gotten this. He's going to get an award for probably the Nobel Pizza Award or whatever they give out for this. And I'm going to say in about a year, they're going to be ready to tar and feather this guy and stick him with the pitchforks. So that's the prophecy that I'm saying for my conspiracy theory tonight. He's going to go not from as the GOAT, greatest of all time, to the GOAT. So there you go. That is my conspiracy theory. And Dr. Stock, I mean, I don't know if you want to jump in on this. I'd say the water is definitely warm.
My conspiracy theory is on his next news conference, Dr. Fauci's head will split in half and Satan will rise out of his neck.
You have won the internet, my friend. That is
that was
good. That is prophecy, conspiracy, and factual. So hey, you covered all three bases.
Say, I love you all.
That is awesome. Well, hey, we want to thank everybody for tuning in. Again, Dr. Spock, we thank you. And panel, I appreciate you more than you know. We have a fun time. We're almost like a little family here that meets on Tuesday nights. So, hey, everybody give the peace out, and I'll run the ending here.
Do we get raises?